My name is Dr. Maris Calder, and I'm 29 years old. 3 years ago, my brother Tate convinced my parents I'd been fired for falsifying credentials, and that one accusation didn't just stain my reputation. It rewrote my entire existence, like I'd never been real to begin with. It's strange what people will accept when it matches the version of you they've already filed away in their minds. My parents didn't ask for context. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't even ask me. They blocked my number, returned my mail unopened, and spoke about me the way people speak about a storm that wrecked a house. Low voices, quick glances, discomfort that makes everyone change the subject. They didn't come to my licensing ceremony. They didn't show up when I married the one person who saw me clearly. For 3 years, I was a ghost with a pulse, living in a world where my name still existed in legal documents and hospital rosters, but not in the mouths of the people who gave it to me. I used to think family meant you could get angry and still belong. I learned the hard way that in some families, belonging is conditional, on obedience, on optics, on whether you're convenient to love. I grew up in Redding, California, in a house that always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and whatever my dad had been repairing in the garage. My father, Glenn Calder, ran a small HVAC business, honest work that left his hands permanently rough and his patience permanently thin. My mother, Patrice, taught third grade for 26 years and had the kind of sharp intuition that made other parents ask her advice about their kids. She could spot a lie in a classroom from across the room just by the way a child blinked. The irony is, she missed the biggest lie of our lives because it wasn't told by a child. It was told by the child she trusted most. Tate is 4 years older than me, and he learned early that charm is a form of currency. He could make adults laugh at dinner parties, talk teachers into bumping grades, talk my parents out of consequences with a grin and a story. He wasn't a bad kid in the obvious ways. He didn't break windows or steal cars. He did something subtler. He made himself necessary. He made himself the center. And in a family that valued stability and looking stable, Tate's confidence was mistaken for reliability. I was the opposite, quiet, focused, the one who didn't demand attention, the one who didn't cause trouble. People called it maturity, but what it really was adaptation. When you learn that being loud doesn't get you listened to, you get smaller, you get efficient, you become the kid who says, "It's fine," even when it isn't, because fine keeps the peace. My parents loved that about me, not because it meant I was thriving, but because it meant I was easy. I was the daughter who could be left out of the frame without anyone noticing the picture looked incomplete. I still remember the first time I realized the household had a hierarchy. I was 10, standing in our driveway with a poster board for a school science fair project, waiting for my dad to come outside. Tate had soccer practice, and he'd forgotten his cleats. My dad burst out the front door like the house was on fire, keys in hand, already talking about how we couldn't be late, already irritated at the world. I cleared my throat and lifted the poster board a little, hopeful. "Dad, can you help me set this up in the garage? It keeps falling over." He didn't even glance at it. "Not now, Maris," he snapped, and then he was gone, because Tate needed something, and Tate's needs always arrived like sirens. I remember standing there with the poster board bending in the wind, watching the taillights disappear, telling myself it didn't matter. I told myself it didn't hurt. That was the beginning of a skill I perfected, swallowing disappointment until it tasted like normal. So when I found something that felt like mine, something that didn't require applause to be meaningful, I clung to it. I didn't go to medical school. I didn't become a lawyer. I didn't chase the kinds of titles my parents liked to brag about at church. I became a paramedic because I liked the clarity of it. Someone calls, you respond. Someone is hurting, you help. The rules are simple. The work is hard, but it's honest. I learned how to stay calm when everyone around me was panicking, how to listen through screaming, how to make decisions with shaking hands and still make the right ones. I liked being useful. I liked earning trust on the basis of what I could do, not who I could charm. Over time, that work pulled me toward emergency medicine in a bigger way. I went back to school while working full-time shifts, grabbed sleep in broken pieces, studied in the back of an ambulance between calls. I earned my Doctor of Nursing practice with a focus on trauma systems and disaster response. And the day I passed my boards, something shifted in my family. My parents drove down from Redding to Sacramento and took me to dinner like I was suddenly someone worth celebrating. My mom cried into her napkin in a way that made me feel like she just remembered I existed. My dad squeezed my shoulder and said, "You did it, kid." And I held those words like a lantern because I'd been waiting my whole life for him to say something that sounded like pride. Across the table, Tate smiled with his mouth and watched with his eyes. At the time, I thought he was tired or distracted or maybe even proud of me in his own way. I didn't understand what that look meant. I didn't understand that Tate wasn't watching me because he was impressed. He was watching because he was measuring, because the spotlight was moving. And in Tate's world, light is a limited resource. If it lands on you, it leaves him colder. I wish I could tell you I saw it coming. I wish I could tell you I protected myself, that I kept my distance, that I didn't hand him anything he could use. But the truth is, I was still naive enough to believe that a brother is a brother, that love is durable, that family has a floor you can't fall through. 2 months after that dinner, I was driving home after a brutal night shift when Tate called me, voice unusually gentle, and said, "Hey, don't panic. Mom and Dad are worried. There are rumors." The second he said the word rumors, my stomach tightened, not because I believed him, but because I knew exactly how my parents operated. They didn't tolerate mess. They didn't ask questions that might lead to conflict. They chose a story and held onto it like a life raft. I gripped the steering wheel and said, "Rumors of what?" And Tate took a breath like he'd been forced into a corner, like he was reluctant to say it, like he was doing me a favor by even bringing it up. "They heard you got kicked out of your program," he said, soft and careful, the way you talk to someone you're trying not to spook. My heart dropped straight through my ribs. "That's not true," I said immediately. "Tate?" And he did what he always did. He wrapped the knife in velvet before he slid it in. "Maris, I believe you," he said quickly. "I do. But you know how people talk." "But you know how people talk," Tate said, his voice smooth and measured, like he was stepping carefully across thin ice. "Mom's already spiraling. Dad's furious. If you just send me something official, paperwork, verification, anything, I can shut it down before it gets worse." I should have told him to have them call me directly. I should have known that if there were rumors, the only responsible response was transparency, not triangulation. But I was exhausted from a 12-hour shift that had blurred into 13. I was still soft enough to believe my brother wouldn't weaponize me. And somewhere deep down, I was still that 10-year-old holding a poster board in the driveway, hoping to be chosen. So I sent him everything: my license number and the public verification link from the state board, my program completion letter with the registrar's seal, my signed employment contract from Sutter Crest Medical Center, even a screenshot of my hospital ID badge because he said, the more official it looks, the better. All the receipts a reasonable person would need. 3 days later, my father called. He didn't say hello. "Your brother showed us what you sent him," he said, and there was something in his tone I'd never heard directed at me before. Not disappointment, not irritation, contempt. Relief flickered in me anyway. "Good," I said quickly. "So you saw it's real." "No." The word cracked like a board snapping in half. "We saw how sloppy you are," I blinked. "What?" "You think we're idiots?" he snapped. "You think we can't tell when something's been edited?" Edited. The room tilted slightly, like my equilibrium had shifted a few inches off center. "Dad, it's literally a state database. You can look it up yourself." "We did look it up," he shot back. My heart stalled. "And it doesn't match what you sent." It took a second for that to land. "Doesn't match." "What do you mean it doesn't match?" I asked slowly. "Tate showed us inconsistencies, formatting issues, dates that don't align." "That's impossible," I said, my voice tightening despite my effort to keep it level. "Unless he changed something." There was a pause, not a thoughtful one, a defensive one. My mother's voice came on the line, thin and shaking, not with confusion, but with something worse. "How long has this been going on?" She whispered. "Going on?" I echoed. "The lies," she said. "The pretending. We raised you better than this, Maris." I pressed my hand against the kitchen counter to steady myself. "Mom, please, just call the hospital. Ask for HR. Ask for my supervisor. Call the board directly. He showed us emails, she said faintly, from someone at your hospital. Cold slid down my spine. What emails? Another pause. Enough, my father cut in. We are not playing detective in our own daughter's fraud case. Fraud case. The words hit like physical force. I didn't commit fraud, I said carefully. And if you're willing to believe that without even verifying... Don't you turn this around on us, he barked. Tate said you begged him not to tell us, said you're in trouble, said you used someone else's credentials to get hired, and now you're trying to cover it. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean internal fracture. That's insane, I said. Why would I send him proof if I was lying? Because you're desperate, my mother said, and her voice broke on the last word. I realized in that moment that they weren't asking questions because they didn't want answers. They already had a narrative, and it made sense to them. It fit the shape of the daughter they'd unconsciously decided I was, the quiet one, the one who might buckle under pressure, the one who could disappoint without warning. Mom? I tried again, softer now. Please just call anyone except Tate. He's been trying to protect us, she said. Protect you. From me. Don't contact this family again until you're ready to tell the truth, my father said. And then the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. The hum of the refrigerator felt too loud. The house felt too small. My entire life had just been reframed in under 5 minutes. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Tate. Open quote, I'm sorry. I couldn't keep covering for you. Close quote. I stared at it, reading it again and again, searching for the scene where the performance ended and the cruelty began. Covering for me. He had taken the documents I sent and altered them. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I could feel it. The mismatched formatting my dad mentioned. The dates that didn't align. He had fabricated the evidence to support the lie he planted. And my parents believed him because believing him required less discomfort. I called back. It went to voicemail. I called my mom. Straight to voicemail. By the 4th attempt, both numbers were blocked. The next morning, I checked my email and found nothing from them. Just a single automated message. Your email could not be delivered. I mailed a letter the following day. Inside were printed verification pages, my hospital's HR contact information, and a short note written in handwriting that shook more than I liked. Please verify independently. I love you. I'm still your daughter. 5 days later, it came back unopened. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Return to sender. That was the moment clarity replaced hope. They weren't confused. They had chosen. And in that choice, I learned something brutal and simple. Sometimes the lie doesn't have to be airtight. It just has to be convenient. Tate didn't need perfect forgery skills. He just needed to give them a story that protected the family image. A daughter who quietly committed fraud and disappeared was embarrassing, but manageable. A son who uncovered the truth and protected his parents? That was noble. He wasn't destroying me in their eyes. He was elevating himself. And the worst part wasn't the lie. It was how easily it fit. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with screaming or slammed doors. It settled in slowly, like dust after a building collapses, fine, suffocating, coating everything. For the first week, I still operated on instinct. I called every morning before my shift and every night after. 14 calls in 5 days. I left voicemails that started composed and ended frayed. Please just verify it independently. Call the board. I'll come up this weekend. By the 4th day, the calls went straight to voicemail. By the 5th, the voicemail greeting was gone. Just a flat automated message. I emailed twice, once short and factual, once longer, attaching verification links and contact names. No response. I mailed a second letter, certified this time. It came back unopened, same handwriting, same verdict. That was when something in me stopped reaching. Not because I didn't care, because I understood that I was knocking on a door that had been deliberately locked from the inside. Tate moved into their spare bedroom, temporarily, 2 weeks later. I found that out from Aunt Dahlia. He says he's helping them manage the stress, she told me carefully, like she was handling something fragile. Says it's been hard on them. Hard on them. The reframing was seamless. My supposed fraud became a burden they were bravely enduring. Tate became the stabilizing force, the devoted son stepping up in crisis. He ran errands, scheduled appointments, handled bills. He was present in ways that made absence easy to forget, and I became a story told in lowered voices. Dahlia didn't sugarcoat it. At dinner with the Harpers, your mom said you're going through a difficult period. She hesitated. Tate told them you're not practicing anymore. I felt my jaw tighten. I never stopped practicing. I know, she said softly, but knowing and correcting are different things. At work, none of this existed. The ED didn't care about family drama. Trauma bays don't pause for betrayal. When someone rolls in bleeding, you move. When a mother collapses in a hallway because her child stopped breathing, you respond. I learned quickly that exhaustion is easier to manage than heartbreak, because exhaustion at least has a predictable rhythm. I volunteered for extra shifts. I joined the county disaster response team. I studied between cases and chased certifications, not because I was trying to prove something to my parents anymore, but because forward motion felt safer than stillness. At 3 a.m, when the fluorescent lights buzzed and the waiting room emptied, I'd sometimes lean against the nurse's station and let the quiet settle over me. That's when it hit the hardest. Not anger, not even sadness. Just the realization that if something happened to me, if I were the one in an ambulance, they wouldn't know. Or worse, they'd hear and hesitate. Evan entered my life during one of those shifts. He wasn't a patient. He was an attorney volunteering with a wildfire mitigation nonprofit, coordinating resources for displaced families after a series of smaller blazes that summer. He came into the ED one evening, looking composed but worn down, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. We met over a clipboard and a shared frustration about bureaucratic delays. He noticed the tremor in my hands before I did. Long shift? He asked. Long year, I replied before I could stop myself. He didn't pry. That was the first thing I liked about him. He didn't push for details like they were owed. Over coffee 2 weeks later, I told him everything in one breathless spill. The forged documents, the blocked calls, the returned mail. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look skeptical. He just said, if they believed him without checking, that wasn't love. That was convenience. The word landed harder than I expected. Convenience. It reframed everything in a way that hurt and clarified at the same time. My parents hadn't conducted an investigation because investigations are uncomfortable. They hadn't called the board because what if they found out I was telling the truth? That would require them to confront Tate. It would require conflict. It would require admitting they'd chosen the wrong narrative. And my parents don't do messy. Evan didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer to confront them or draft legal letters. He simply showed up. Consistently, quietly. He learned my coffee order. He texted before my night shifts and waited up when he could. He met Dahlia and treated her like family without asking for backstory. The first holiday season without my parents was brutal in small, specific ways. I kept checking my phone out of reflex. I half expected a guilt-driven invitation at the last minute. None came. Dahlia hosted Thanksgiving and squeezed my hand under the table when someone accidentally said Tate's name too casually. Christmas morning, Evan and I opened gifts in our apartment, and I felt like an imposter in my own life, grateful but displaced. My wedding invitation came back in March, unopened. The envelope was slightly bent this time, like it had been handled and set aside before being rejected. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in a drawer instead of the trash. Evan's parents flew in from Seattle. Dahlia cried enough for 2 parents. The courthouse ceremony was simple and unadorned. No aisle, no dramatic music. Just vows spoken in a room with fluorescent lights and a judge who mispronounced my middle name. It was still real. Afterward, when the photos were taken on the courthouse steps, I felt something unexpected. Not grief, but clarity. The absence was sharp, yes, but it was also honest. No pretending, no strained smiles masking disbelief. 3 years is long enough to build muscle memory around absence. I stopped waiting for regret to arrive. I stopped imagining my father showing up unannounced with an apology rehearsed in the truck outside. I stopped crafting speeches in the shower where I laid out evidence like a closing argument. Instead, I built a life that didn't require their validation to feel legitimate. And that's the part Tate never anticipated. He thought isolation would weaken me. It didn't. It forced me to define myself without them. Still, there were nights when I lay awake beside Evan, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last phone call over and over, wondering if there was a sentence I could have said differently, a tone I could have adjusted, some version of me that would have been easier to believe. But the truth settled eventually, steady and unsentimental. The lie didn't win because it was clever. It won because it was easier than the alternative. And in that ease, I lost my family. Or so I thought. 3 years passed in a rhythm that felt almost stable. I had stopped flinching when I saw my parents' area code pop up in my mind, because it never popped up on my phone. I had learned how to carry the absence without letting it define the room. Work filled the spaces that used to belong to longing. The ED became my ecosystem, controlled chaos, bright lights, the clean logic of protocols. I knew exactly who I was there. I was competent, decisive, respected. No one questioned my credentials because they saw them in action every single shift. If someone coded, I ran the algorithm without hesitation. If a family needed answers, I gave them plainly and with compassion. In the hospital, truth had weight. It had lab values and chart notes and signatures. It couldn't be reshaped by whoever spoke loudest. Then the Sierra Ridge fire ignited. It started as a small brush report and turned monstrous within hours, wind whipping flames across dry hills like a fuse racing toward a charge. By mid-afternoon, we were on alert. By evening, we were activating disaster protocol. The sky over Sacramento took on that apocalyptic orange that makes everything feel unreal. Ash drifted down like dirty snow. You could taste smoke even inside the hospital. At 2:11 a.m., my pager shrieked. MCI incoming. Multiple burn victims. Smoke inhalation. Structural collapse. ETA 10 minutes. Adrenaline erased fatigue. I pulled my hair into a tight knot, grabbed my trauma badge, and moved. The ED transformed in seconds. Extra gurneys rolled into place, respiratory carts lined up, blood bank notified. My team snapped into their roles with the kind of efficiency that only comes from repetition and trust. I love that about emergency medicine. When everything else falls apart, structure holds. The first wave came fast. 2 construction workers pulled from a collapsed outbuilding, a teenager with severe burns on his arms, an elderly woman wheezing from smoke exposure. We triaged, intubated, stabilized. It was relentless but familiar. Disaster medicine is awful, but it's predictable in its awfulness. Then Rhea, my charge nurse, approached with an iPad clutched to her chest. Critical incoming, she said. Male, early 30s, severe inhalation injury, blunt trauma, possible internal bleeding. Room 3, I said automatically, already mentally running the checklist. She handed me the screen. I glanced down. Patient, Tate Calder, 33. Next of kin, Glenn Calder. The hallway noise dulled like someone had dropped thick glass between me and the world. For a split second, I couldn't feel my hands. Not here. Not like this. The image of the returned envelope flashed in my mind. The blocked calls. The text that said, I couldn't keep covering for you. Maris, Rhea's voice cut through. You okay? I forced myself to inhale. Clinical. Detached. Family member, I said quietly. I'm disclosing conflict. Page Dr. Henson to co-lead. Document it. She didn't blink. She just nodded and moved. That's the thing about professionals. You don't have to explain your entire life story. You state the conflict. You adjust the chain of command. You keep going. The ambulance doors burst open seconds later. Tate was strapped to a gurney, soot smeared across his face, hair singed at the edges. His chest rose in shallow, frantic pulls. Every breath sounded like it scraped over gravel. There was blood on his shirt, dark and spreading. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Behind the gurney stumbled my parents. My mother's hair was unbrushed, her coat half-zipped. My father looked older than I remembered. Shoulders slightly bent, eyes wide in a way that stripped him of authority. They didn't see me at first. They saw the gurney, the oxygen mask, the IV lines. Where's the doctor? My father demanded, grabbing at the nearest nurse. Who's in charge? The nurse pointed past him. She is. My father turned, his eyes locked on my badge. For 3 years, they had believed I wasn't even practicing, that I had imploded quietly and disappeared into disgrace. Now I was standing 10 feet away in trauma blues with my name and credentials stitched in white thread. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. My mother's hand clamped around his forearm so tightly I saw his sleeve bunch under her grip. Mr. and Mrs. Calder, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Your son has severe smoke inhalation and blunt trauma. We're intubating and taking him for imaging. I'll update you as soon as we have more information." My mother's face crumpled. Maris. I took one deliberate step back, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Right now, he was my patient. Right now, I was his provider. There was no room for daughter. "I've been here," I added quietly when my father finally found his voice enough to whisper, "You're here." For years. Then I turned and followed the gurney into the trauma bay. The room filled with motion, respiratory prepping for intubation, monitors beeping, gloves snapping into place. I slipped into my role as naturally as breathing. Airway first. We sedated, intubated. His oxygen saturation dipped dangerously before stabilizing. We ordered scans, labs, fluids. I gave commands in short, precise bursts. In those moments, something unexpected happened. The anger I'd carried for 3 years didn't flare. It narrowed. It became a line instead of a wildfire. Because no matter what Tate had done, he was a human body failing in front of me. And I don't let bodies fail if I can stop it. 2 hours later, his vitals were stable enough to move to imaging. I stepped into the hallway and leaned briefly against the wall, letting the fluorescent lights hum overhead. Through the glass doors, I could see my parents sitting side by side in rigid silence. For 3 years, they had believed I was the catastrophe. Now catastrophe had delivered them to me. And the truth wasn't going to arrive in a scream. It was going to arrive in documentation, in timestamps, in verification links, in the quiet dismantling of a story they had built because it was easier than questioning the son who told it. I straightened my shoulders. It was time. I didn't go to them immediately. I waited until Tate was stabilized, until Dr. Henson had signed off on the imaging orders, and respiratory confirmed his airway was secure. Professional first, always. When I finally stepped into the waiting area, the clock on the wall read 4:37 a.m., and the fluorescent lights made everything look slightly unreal, like we were suspended outside of normal time. My parents were sitting side by side in molded plastic chairs, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. They looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just reduced, stripped of the certainty they used to wear like armor. My father stood when he saw me. He always stood first. It was reflex, assert control, take the floor. But this time there was no command in it, only confusion. "How is he?" he asked, voice hoarse. "He's intubated," I said evenly. "Severe smoke inhalation, possible internal bleeding. We're running imaging now. He's stable for the moment." "For the moment," my mother echoed, as if the phrase itself were fragile. Silence settled between us. Thick, expectant. My father's eyes flicked to my badge again, like he still needed to confirm it was real. "You're leading this?" he asked. "Yes." "You work here," he pressed. "I've worked here for 3 years." The words weren't sharp. I didn't raise my voice, but they landed. My mother's lips trembled. "We thought—" "I know what you thought," I said quietly. Before either of them could spiral into explanation or defense, I continued. "I need you to understand something clearly. I disclosed the conflict of interest. Another attending is co-leading. Your son is receiving appropriate care. He's my patient right now. That's the only role I can occupy in this moment." It was controlled, measured. The way I speak to families when emotions threaten to derail comprehension. But under that control was something steady and unyielding. I was not here to beg. My father ran a hand through his hair. "Maris, we were told." "I know," I repeated. There it was again. That instinct to explain before they even acknowledged what they'd done. I had spent years rehearsing defenses, lining up proof, crafting speeches. Now that the stage existed, I realized I didn't want to perform. "I've asked Aunt Dahlia to come," I said instead. Both of them looked startled. "Why?" my mother asked faintly. "Because this isn't going to be a conversation built on memory," I replied. "It's going to be built on evidence." The word evidence hung between us. My father stiffened. "We're not in court." "No," I said calmly, "but we are in reality." Dahlia arrived 20 minutes later with the purposeful stride of someone who had been waiting for permission to speak for years. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't soften the air. She simply pulled up a chair and sat. "I'm done being quiet," she said. My mother flinched. Dahlia opened her tote bag and pulled out a slim folder, then her phone. "Before anyone says anything else, I'm going to show you what I've been sitting on." She turned the phone toward my parents. First, the public license verification, time-stamped from 2 days after Tate's original claim. valid, active, in good standing. Then the email I'd sent my parents with HR contact information and direct verification links. Then a screenshot from 2 years ago, a text from Tate to Dahlia. Open quote, "Don't tell them she's still practicing. It'll just confuse them. They're finally at peace." Close quote. The room went very still. My mother made a small, wounded sound. My father leaned closer to the screen, blinking slowly as if his vision might rearrange the words into something less damning. "He told us you never called," my father said, voice barely above a whisper. "I called 14 times in 5 days," I said. "You blocked me." "He said you begged him not to tell us," my mother added weakly. "I begged you to verify," I corrected. Dahlia swiped again. There were the original documents I'd sent unaltered, and beside them versions Tate had forwarded to my parents. Subtle edits, formatting inconsistencies, slight shifts in dates that created doubt without obvious forgery. "He manipulated them," Dahlia said plainly, "and you didn't check." My father's jaw tightened reflexively, like he wanted to argue. But there was nothing to argue with. The proof wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was boring and factual and irrefutable. And that's what made it devastating. "I didn't want to believe," my mother started, then faltered. "You didn't want conflict," Dahlia said evenly. "You wanted the story that preserved the image." My father looked at me then, not with anger, not with authority, but with something I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "What have we done?" he asked. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was genuine. And I realized something in that moment. For 3 years, I'd imagined this confrontation as explosive, loud, cathartic. Instead, it was quiet, surgical. The lie didn't collapse in a blaze. It dissolved under documentation. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply said, "You chose not to check. That's the part you have to sit with." My mother covered her face with both hands. My father stared at the floor like it might offer instructions. I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a strange, clean stillness. Because the truth, once spoken, doesn't shout. It settles, and there was no more room left for their version of me. The catastrophe they believed in had just intubated their son and saved his airway. The daughter they erased was standing in front of them, credentialed and composed. For 3 years, they had lived in a story where I was the cautionary tale. Now the narrative had nowhere left to hide. And for the first time since that phone call, I wasn't defending myself. I was simply present, real, and undeniable. Tate regained consciousness late the next afternoon. I was reviewing labs at the nurse's station when respiratory paged me to let me know he was waking up. His oxygen levels had stabilized overnight. The internal bleeding we'd suspected turned out to be less severe than feared. Bruising, not rupture. He was lucky. If the fire had burned a few minutes longer or the smoke had thickened a little more, we might have been having a different conversation. Luck has a cruel sense of timing. When I walked into his ICU room, he was blinking against the fluorescent lights, disoriented, one hand twitching weakly against the sheet. The ventilator had been removed, replaced by a high-flow nasal cannula. His voice, when he tried to speak, was shredded. He turned his head slightly and saw me. There it was again, that flicker of recognition sliding into calculation. "Maris?" he rasped. "Hi," I said, my tone neutral. "You're in the ICU. You had significant smoke inhalation. You're stable now." He swallowed painfully. His gaze drifted to my badge, reading it the way our father had, as if the embroidery might rearrange itself. "You're working here?" he asked. "I've been working here for 3 years." Silence pooled between us. Behind the glass, I could see my parents hovering in the hallway, their silhouettes tense. Dahlia stood a few steps back, arms folded, watching like someone who had waited a long time for this exact scene. Tate's eyes flicked toward them and then back to me. His throat worked as he tried to sit up slightly, wincing. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear, I didn't know you were—" "Stop," I said gently but firmly. "Don't perform." His mouth closed. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to imagine. There was no surge of heat, no shaking hands, just clarity. "You told them I falsified credentials," I continued. "You altered documents. You told Aunt Dahlia to stay quiet." He looked toward the ceiling instead of at me. "I was trying to protect them," he said weakly. "From what?" "You were," he faltered. "You were pulling away. You were different." Different. The word almost made me laugh. "I went to graduate school," I said. "I built a career." "You were leaving us," he muttered. "I was living." The room was quiet except for the soft hiss of oxygen. For the first time in my life, I saw Tate without the armor of charm. No easy grin, no confident cadence, just a man lying in a hospital bed with ash still caught in his hair. "You couldn't handle it," I said quietly. "That I didn't need you to explain me." His jaw tightened, and there, finally, was a flash of something unpolished. "I didn't like the way they looked at you," he admitted, almost to himself. I waited. "They were proud," he said, voice cracking, "of you." The honesty was so stark it startled me. "And that threatened you?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "Yes." The word sat between us, small but seismic. For years I'd tried to decode his motives. Was it cruelty? Was it boredom? Was it malice for its own sake? It was something simpler and more fragile. Insecurity. "You could have handled that like an adult," I said. "Instead, you built a lie big enough to swallow me." He winced. Whether from pain or from the truth, I couldn't tell. "I didn't think it would go that far," he murmured. "That's the thing about lies," I replied. "You don't get to decide how far they go." There was a knock at the door. My father stepped inside slowly. My mother closed behind him. They looked from Tate to me like they were watching a balance tip. "Tate," my father said, voice uneven. "Is it true?" Tate stared at the ceiling. For a moment I thought he might pivot again, deflect, reframe, cry. Instead he exhaled. "Yes," he said. My mother made a soft, broken sound. "I changed the documents, or," he continued hoarsely, "I told you she was lying. I told you not to check." The confession wasn't dramatic. It wasn't eloquent. It was exhausted. My father stepped back as if physically struck. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "I don't know why I did it," Tate added quickly, as if scrambling to soften the blow. "You know why," I said quietly. "You said it." The room felt smaller somehow. 3 years of absence had compressed into this one sterile space. My father looked at me then, not with authority, not with dismissal, but with something like grief. "We failed you," he said. The words hung in the air. They weren't loud. They weren't wrapped in defensiveness. They were simple. And that simplicity was heavier than any apology I'd rehearsed. "I'm not here for revenge," I said carefully. "I'm here because he was my patient. That's it." My mother took a tentative step toward me, then stopped herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I believe you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't undo 3 years." Tate shifted weakly in the bed, as if the weight of the room had settled physically onto him. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "You tell the truth," I said, "in writing. To everyone you lied to. No framing, no spin." He swallowed. And then, I said evenly, "we see what's left." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace. Just the quiet understanding that the narrative he had constructed had collapsed under its own falseness. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one fighting to be believed. I was simply standing in the aftermath of the truth, and it felt strangely calm. The conversation with my parents happened 2 days later, after Tate had been moved out of the ICU and the immediate crisis had thinned into something quieter. They asked to see me, not in his room, not in a hallway, but somewhere private. We ended up in a small conference room on the 3rd floor with beige walls and a round table that had seen too many difficult conversations. There was a pot of burnt coffee in the corner that nobody touched. The air felt heavy, not with anger, but with something older and harder to name. My mother started crying before she even sat down. "I don't know how we let this happen," she said, her voice breaking in the middle. "I don't know how I didn't check." My father didn't cry. He rarely does, but he looked diminished. The certainty he used to carry like a shield was gone. He stared at the table like it might offer him instructions. I folded my hands in front of me, steady. I had imagined this moment for years. Imagined shouting, imagined collapsing into tears, imagined listing every detail of the damage. Instead, I felt composed. Not cold, not detached, just clear. "I need you to understand something," I began. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. You chose not to verify." My father flinched slightly. "We trusted him," he said. "You trusted him without question," I replied, "and you refused to even consider that I might be telling the truth." My mother shook her head weakly. "We thought you were ashamed, that you didn't want to face us. I sent you verification links. I sent you HR contacts. I mailed documents. We thought they were fake," my father said quietly. "You thought that because Tate told you to." Silence settled again. I let it. For 3 years, I had filled silence with explanations, hoping clarity would earn access. This time, I wasn't feeling anything. I'm not interested in punishing you, I said finally. I'm interested in structure. They both looked up at that word. Structure? My mother echoed. Yes. If you want to be part of my life going forward, there are conditions. My father straightened slightly, reflexively bracing for a confrontation. I'm listening, he said. First, I said calmly, you verify before you believe. Always. With everyone, including Tate. My father nodded slowly. Second, you both go to counseling. Not to fix me, to understand why you let one child narrate the other child's entire life. My father's jaw tightened. We don't. That's not optional, I said evenly. If we're rebuilding anything, it has to be different than what existed before. My mother spoke before he could protest further. We'll go. My father hesitated, eyes moving between us. Finally, he said, okay. The word wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Third, I continued, you stop making me prove I deserve space. No more tests, no more subtle checks to see if I'm stable enough, successful enough, good enough to belong. My mother nodded through tears. And fourth, I said, Tate sends a written confession to every person he lied to. No spin, no softening, just the truth. My father exhaled slowly. He agreed. I know, I said. We sat there for a moment, the weight of what had been lost pressing quietly between us. I missed your wedding, my mother whispered. Yes, I said. I missed 3 years, my father added, voice low. Yes. I didn't soften it. I didn't rush to reassure them, because acknowledging loss is part of repair. I can't give those years back, my mother said. No, I replied. You can't. But we want to be here now. The phrase lingered, now. It sounded fragile. Then be consistent, I said. No grand gestures, no dramatic apologies, just consistency. My father nodded again. For the first time, I saw something shift in him. Not pride dissolving, not strength disappearing, but rigidity cracking. He looked tired in a way that felt honest. I was wrong, he said. Those 4 words did something inside me that anger never could. They didn't erase the past. They didn't undo the silence. But they created a small opening. I'm not promising forgiveness, I said carefully. I'm promising boundaries. My mother reached across the table, hesitated, and then rested her hand lightly over mine. I didn't pull away, but I didn't grip back either. We were not rewinding. We were negotiating new terms. After we stood to leave, my father paused at the door. I don't expect this to be easy, he said. It won't be, I replied. But we'll do the work. I studied him for a long second, searching for performance, for deflection, for the old tone of authority. I didn't find it. I found uncertainty. And maybe, just maybe, willingness. As I walked back down the hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. For 3 years, I had imagined this as a reckoning. It wasn't. It was a negotiation. The lie had collapsed. The truth had surfaced. Now came the harder part, the slow, unglamorous labor of deciding whether anything could be rebuilt on the other side of it. And for the first time since that phone call 3 years ago, the choice wasn't being made for me. It was being made with me, on my terms. Tate sent the email on a Wednesday night. 36 family members copied. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years because every thread back to them had run through him. I didn't open it right away. Evan saw the notification on my laptop while we were sitting at the kitchen table and quietly slid a mug of tea toward me. He didn't say, you should read it. He didn't say anything at all. He just sat across from me, steady as always, giving me the space to decide when I was ready. When I finally clicked, it wasn't dramatic, no preamble, no poetry, no softening language. He wrote that he had lied, that he altered documents I had sent him, that he told our parents I falsified credentials, that he discouraged them from verifying independently, that I never abandoned the family, that he made sure they believed I had. It was 3 paragraphs. It was factual. It was devastating. The replies started trickling in within the hour. Some short, some stunned, a few angry. One aunt wrote, I repeated this story at church. Another cousin replied only, I don't know who you are anymore. No one rushed to comfort him. No one reframed it as sibling rivalry or miscommunication. For the first time in our family history, the narrative didn't bend around Tate's voice. Aunt Dahlia confirmed delivery to everyone. She called me the next morning and said, it's done. Her voice held no triumph. just completion. My parents started counseling the following week in Chico. My mother dove into it like someone who had been waiting for permission to admit something for years. She wrote me a letter after their third session, handwritten, 4 pages long. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't blame confusion or stress. She wrote, "I chose comfort over courage. I believe the version that didn't require confrontation." She admitted she had always relied on Tate to narrate emotional situations because he spoke confidently, and I withdrew when hurt. She said that silence was her coping mechanism and that it had cost her a daughter. I read that letter 3 times before placing it in the same drawer where I had kept the returned envelopes from years ago. Different side of the drawer. Same history. My father struggled more. Therapy unsettled him. It disrupted his identity as the decisive one, the authority. He told me once, stiffly, "The therapist says I don't revisit decisions once I make them." I raised an eyebrow. "That's accurate." He almost smiled. "It's not always strength," he added, quieter. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." We started with small things. Sunday phone calls, brief, structured, not emotional marathons, just updates. How's work? How's your back? Did the dog finally stop chewing the couch? Consistency over intensity. That became the rule. Tate and I met for coffee 3 weeks after his discharge. Neutral territory. Public enough to prevent performance, private enough for honesty. He looked thinner, quieter. There was no easy grin waiting to fill silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said immediately. "Good," I replied, "because that's not on the table yet." He nodded. "I started therapy," he added. "That's between you and your therapist," I said. "What's between us is accountability." He swallowed and then said something I didn't expect. "I didn't think you'd survive it," he admitted. "Survive what? Being cut off like that." The admission was revealing in a way he probably didn't intend. "You underestimated me," I said. "Yes." There it was again, that fragile honesty. I didn't tell him we were even. We weren't. Scars don't cancel each other out. But I also didn't carry the same sharp anger I once did. It had dulled into something more precise. Awareness. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I told him. "But this version of us won't look like the old one." "I know," he said. And for once, I believed he did. The first time my parents came to my house after all of it was early Sunday morning. Light snow dusted the yard, not enough to stick, just enough to soften the edges of everything. My father stood on the porch holding a grocery bag like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. My mother had made lemon bars. When I opened the door, we all paused, not because of anger, because of newness. "Hi," my mom said, tentative. "Come in," I replied. "Coffee's ready." My father stepped inside slowly, looking around like he was cataloging the life he had almost missed entirely. The framed wedding photo on the wall, the disaster response commendation plaque, the dog bed in the corner. "How many plates?" he asked quietly when I started setting the table. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. "3, I said, "for now." He nodded and opened the cabinet I pointed to. 1 plate, then another, then the third. No speeches, no dramatic apologies, just the soft clink of ceramic meeting wood. We ate French toast and talked about ordinary things, weather, work, the neighbor's broken fence. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't sweeping reconciliation. It was careful. It was structured. And it was real. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how deep forgiveness will go or how long repair will take. I know only this: I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I built a life that stands on its own foundation. If they want to enter it, they do so through a door I control. Not as a ghost, not as a cautionary tale, but as myself. And this time, that is enough.